It's 5 p.m. across India. I am Tanvi Taneja, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. And joining me today from London is my colleague, Julia Chapman. Good afternoon to you, Julia.
Good afternoon, Tanvi. It's 11:30 a.m. here in the UK and 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we look at the outcomes of the APEC summit, why Finland is tightening its borders, and fresh hopes for panda diplomacy. But first, the headlines.
Israeli Prime Minister says attempts to minimize civilian casualty in Gaza not successful. Israeli troops retrieve body of the soldier held hostage adjacent to the Al-Shifa hospital. US President Joe Biden hails the power of the Pacific at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation APEC Summit Gala Dinner in San Francisco.
Together, we can harness the power of the Pacific to grow our economies, to uplift our workers, to protect our planet, to connect our people to one another.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi opens the second Voice of the Global South Summit, says it's time for members to talk in one voice for greater global good. So our first news of the Israel-Hamas conflict, the Israeli Defense Forces shot dead 2 gunmen who had opened fire at the troops near the West Bank city of Hebron. The Israeli military says that there are no reports of injuries from the Israeli side. Meanwhile, Hamas and the militant group Islamic Jihad clashed with Israeli forces in the streets of Jenin for several hours on Friday, resulting in heavy gunfire and ambushes with explosives. Earlier, the Israeli military said that it uncovered a Hamas tunnel shaft at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital complex. The army said that its troops also found a vehicle in the hospital containing a large number of weapons. The military also made public videos and photographs of the tunnel shaft and weapons.
The army forces found underground shaft inside AI Shifa hospital. The engineering forces destroyed the infrastructure. We also found in the hospital Hamas vehicle that was ready to be part of the October 7 attack, but did not go on the road, and inside it was a huge amount of arms.
Now, in some shocking development, Israeli military have found the body of an Israeli hostage taken into Gaza by Hamas in its attack last month. Israel's military spokesman said that the body of Yehudit Weiss was recovered by troops in a building near the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. Now, DD India's Sarah Coates joins us live from Tel Aviv to tell us more. Sarah, aid supplies to Gaza have halted again, and fears within Gaza regarding Israel's military campaign are growing. What more can you tell us?
You're certainly right, Tanvi. Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has declared the next stage is coming. And look, what could be a sign that this ground operation is moving further south. Residents in Khan Yunis, which is in the south of the Gaza Strip, are reporting that they're having leaflets, flyers dropped in their neighbourhoods, telling them everyone who finds themselves near the terrorists or their buildings exposes their life to danger, urging these people to move to a 14 square kilometre safe zone. That's what it's being called by the Israeli military down in the very south of the Gaza Strip. Now, Tanvi, what is important to point out here is before this conflict, this ground operation began, this 14 square kilometre area down in the south was home to 400,000 people. There are now more than 1 million people down in this area, and there are massive concerns over overcrowding right now. Aid agencies like the United Nations are saying that there's simply not enough to go around. The World Food Programme says that there is an imminent risk of starvation inside Gaza, saying urgent food assistance is needed. We understand that there's one toilet for every 800 people. And right now, communication networks are also cut. This is the fourth time that it's happened in that coastal enclave in the past month. So look, the situation is extremely dire already. 70% of people don't have access to clean drinking water. And if more people from Khan Yunis end up fleeing south down to this so-called safe zone, then it would potentially really compound this situation and make it much worse.
Okay. Sarah, what is the latest on the body of hostage or hostages being found near the Al-Shifa hospital and the deal to release the ones still alive?
Well, look, Tanvi, you did mention one hostage. She was found yesterday, that elderly woman from the southern kibbutz. But today, the military released information that it's also found the body of 19-year-old Noah Marciano. She was the Israeli soldier that appeared in a video released by Hamas a matter of days ago. A couple of days after that, the military announced that she is now a fallen soldier. Her body was also found near Al-Shifa hospital yesterday. We only got this information early this morning, with her body now handed over to her parents for burial. Now, with regards to this hostage negotiation that's been widely spoken about, a negotiation that's being mediated by Qatar between Hamas and Israel, also overseen by the United States. There's still no word on that, but we did hear from the Israeli Prime Minister during an interview last night. Benjamin Netanyahu came out to say we will have a temporary ceasefire if we get our hostages back. So look, Tanvi, still no word on whether this deal is happening. It was reportedly set to release 50 ladies, women and their children, with 50 or so prisoners, female prisoners who are being held in Israeli jails. But look, the parents of these people and the loved ones of these people are absolutely fed up right now. They're continuing their march to Jerusalem. They'll hold a rally outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office tomorrow night, demanding that the government do more to get these people back.
Thank you, Sarah Coates, for those updates. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, during his opening remarks at the Voice of the Global South Summit, touched on the Israel-Hamas conflict. He said India has called for restraint so far and that this is the time when Global South countries should unite for the greater good.
सिविलियंस की मौत की हम कठोर निंदा करते हैं। राष्ट्रपति महमूद अब्बास जी से बात कर हमने फिलिस्तीन के लोगों के लिए मानवीय सहायता भी भेजी है। ये समय है जब ग्लोबल साउथ के देश ग्रेटर ग्लोबल गुड के लिए एक स्वर में बात करें। वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर के लिए हम सब मिलकर 5 C's के साथ आगे बढ़ें। जब मैं 5 C's की बात करता हूं तब कंसल्टेशन, कोऑपरेशन, कम्युनिकेशन, क्रिएटिविटी और कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग।
So, as we told you, the virtual session of the second Voice of the Global South Summit began here in New Delhi today. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed this inaugural session, during which he asserted that geographically the Global South has always existed, but it is getting a voice for the first time, and this is because of the joint efforts of the group.
In Canada, we feel that the Canadian politics has given space to violent and extreme political opinions which advocate separatism from India, including through violent means. And these people have been accommodated in Canadian politics. They are given the freedom to articulate their views. If you have a reason to make such an allegation, please share the evidence with us. We are not ruling out an investigation and looking at anything which they may have to offer. They haven't done so.
So this was India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar reiterating that Canada has never provided any evidence on Khalistani leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar's killing. Responding to a question at this event organised at the Wilton Park in London on the theme "How a Billion People See the World," Dr. Jaishankar said that India is not ruling out an investigation into Canada's accusation. But Ottawa is yet to provide evidence to back its claim. That's what External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar was reiterating. Now, going back to Israel, the conflict with Israel continues, and EU's Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell is also visiting Israel today, and he expresses his solidarity with Israel in its right to defend itself. My colleague Julia Chapman will be joining us shortly with more on that. Moving on for now, SpaceX is about to test its spacecraft flight for a second time as part of a wider mission with NASA to get humans back to the moon. Their first test flight blew up minutes after takeoff, and it's taken months to get regulators to clear another try. My colleague Caroline Malone reports from Washington.
SpaceX is hoping to be part of the next giant leap for mankind, 50 years after humans first went to the moon. A test window for the Starship spacecraft launch will open from Saturday, when the spacecraft is due to shoot up and then detach from its rocket. CEO Elon Musk said earlier in the year he sees about a 50% chance of it reaching orbital velocity, but even getting to stage separation is a win. That's better odds than when it first tested in April, when the Starship faltered within minutes after it took off and had to self-destruct, exploding over the Gulf of Mexico. Since then, SpaceX has had to wait for safety and environmental reviews, but has now been cleared by regulators to try again. The ultimate goal is for the spacecraft to play a part in NASA's Artemis moon mission, a return to the lunar surface in 2025. And even to put humans onto Mars for the first time. Caroline Malone in Washington, reporting for DD India.
And we are taking a small break here on DD India Global. My colleague Julia Chapman will be with us on the other side. Stay with us. Now, welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell has urged Israel to not get consumed by rage in its response to last month's Hamas's attack. Accompanied by Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen, Borrell visited the kibbutz where Hamas killed nearly 130 people. Borrell will also be visiting the West Bank, where he will meet top Palestinian leaders, including President Mahmoud Abbas. And DD India's correspondent Alex Cadier reports to us from Brussels. Alex, what is Josep Borrell hoping to achieve on his trip to the Middle East?
Well, it's very much a tricky balance to strike diplomatically. He is walking a diplomatic tightrope. He is trying to put forward the EU's position to Israeli officials. He met with the Israeli President Isaac Herzog, as well as you just mentioned, Eli Cohen, the foreign minister, his counterpart. And he was trying to express the EU's united view, at least the view they agreed to unite behind, which is the condemnation of Hamas for the terrorist attack, the call for those hostages to be released as quickly as possible without condition by Hamas and other Palestinian organizations, but also calling for restraint in Israel's response, calling for humanitarian pauses, calling for the respect of international law and international humanitarian law. So we saw that delicate balance being struck by Josep Borrell. He also spoke of his personal experiences. All the way back in 1969, he stayed on a kibbutz like the one he visited for a few months. He met his first wife there, so he had a real personal connection that he added to his trip there. As you said, looking forward, he will now meet with Benny Gantz, the Israeli minister, before heading to Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, meeting, as you said, with President Mahmoud Abbas, the Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh as well, and Riyad al-Maliki, his foreign minister counterpart. So a very busy schedule for him and a very delicate balance for diplomacy for the EU.
And Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will also be traveling to the region. What can you tell us about her trip?
Yeah, absolutely. It really shows how serious the EU is about this diplomatic push, this diplomatic effort. We have seen the EU's foreign ministers come together behind a slightly more long-term plan. So there are two aspects here. In the short term, the European Union, the European Commission are upping their funding, humanitarian support for Gaza. That's something I'm sure we'll hear Ursula von der Leyen mentions when she travels to meet President al-Sisi of Egypt and the King of Jordan, King Abdullah II. And that's one aspect. The other aspect is finding practical solutions to help Gaza. We saw Cyprus offering a maritime route for aid, which would avoid pinch points on those land borders that we've seen are very complicated to get through. But it shows that the EU is very serious about a more lasting peace. They have a plan of 6 points, including no to the reduction of the size of Gaza, no to the forced displacements of Gazans, but also no to the return of Hamas. Those are three of the points that the EU is putting forward. So this diplomatic mission, two of the EU's top officials are in the Middle East to talk to their partners to try and hash out a more lasting solution. The real question that remains, and that is unclear, is whether or not either side, Israel, Hamas, or the Palestinian Authority, will listen.
Thank you, Alex Cadier. Now, leaders attending the APEC summit in San Francisco, United States of America, were unable to reach consensus on the trade portion of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF. The US-led framework, which India is also a part of, is seen as a bid to counter the Chinese influence in the region. DD India's Ira Spitzer has sent us this report from the summit.
The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit is all but wrapped up here in San Francisco with more than a dozen leaders from around the world basically just going to meet for a retreat in the morning, as well as a couple bilateral meetings before heading back to their respective countries. Now, India is not an official member of APEC, but was represented here as a guest economy with the Minister of Industry and Commerce, Piyush Goyal, attending parts of the summit, as well as the negotiations taking place on something called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. commonly called the IPEF, and that agreement is widely seen as an attempt by the U.S. to try and counter Chinese economic influence in the Indo-Pacific region. And President Biden had hoped, heading into the APEC Leaders Summit, to have the IPEF completely signed, sealed, and agreed by the 14 member economies, including India. However, that actually hit some snags along the way in the negotiating process. IPEF is divided into these 4 pillars. Those pillars are supply chain resilience, trade, clean energy, as well as anti-corruption measures. Now, the leaders were able to agree on 3 of those pillars, but that crucial trade pillar proved elusive. And India, by the way, is not party to the trade part of the IPEF agreement. So we heard from President Biden just a short while ago saying that this is going to be an ongoing negotiation as these economies try and come to some agreement about issues like market access, which of course is something that the other nations in the United States would like to have for their economies, but the U.S. has been reluctant so far to grant that sort of market access or the types of trade deals that some are looking for. So President Biden hailing this as a victory, but also, of course, some disappointment here at the failure to really agree this comprehensive agreement. Reporting in San Francisco, Ira Spitzer for DD India.
Now, on the sidelines of the APEC summit in San Francisco, India's Minister of Commerce and Industry, Piyush Goyal, spoke about the country's global positioning and said that the world leaders are looking forward to greater engagements with India.
They're very, very much looking forward to greater engagement with India. They hold India in very high esteem as a nation whose voice matters. The respect that I got clearly demonstrated that almost all the world leaders are very fond of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They had huge respect for him. Everybody was inquiring about him. And I can clearly see that India's position at the world stage has significantly changed. We are now being recognized as a very powerful voice and a consensus builder, a country and a leadership you can trust.
Still with San Francisco, U.S. President Joe Biden hosted a gala dinner for heads of delegations at the APEC summit in the city on Thursday night. APEC accounts for about 62% of global GDP and almost half of global trade. It does not include India, but the South Asian nation was invited to attend as a guest economy. In his short address, Biden hailed the power of the Pacific to grow economies and connect people to one another.
We gather this week in San Francisco at an inflection point in history. One of the full new challenges. It's not only challenges, but new threats as well. But we have to never forget that we can change and bend the arc of history for the better if we make up our mind to do it. That together we can harness the power of the Pacific to grow our economies, to uplift our workers, to protect our planet, to connect our people to one another and the future of greater prosperity and dignity for all.
Still with the U.S., in news providing relief for U.S. federal workers, U.S. President Joe Biden has signed a temporary spending bill to prevent a government shutdown. Biden approved the bill a day after it was passed by the Senate. The Senate vote marked the end of this year's third budget standoff in Congress that nearly led to the U.S. defaulting on its debts of more than $31 trillion. A partial shutdown would have delayed the salary payments of 4 million federal employees. On to Europe, Finland will close some crossings on the border with Russia from Friday. Prime Minister Petteri Orpo said 4 crossing points in the south would close at midnight on Friday, while 2 in the north would stay open for asylum applications. Neighbouring Norway, which shares a border with Russia in the Arctic, is also ready to close its border if necessary. DD India's Trent Murray has more.
Well, Finland shares a 1,300-kilometre border with Russia. It is the largest border of any neighbouring European nation. But the president of Finland has announced that he will be ordering the closure of 4 of the country's 9 official border crossings. Now, the reason he says he is doing this is because the country is experiencing a surge in immigrants trying to cross the border from Russia. He has accused Moscow of engineering a problem with asylum seekers in order to enact revenge on Finland for its cooperation with the United States and NATO. What we are hearing from Helsinki is that there has been a large surge in people coming from third countries, in other words, people from outside of Europe arriving at that border with Finland claiming asylum. The Finnish are saying that the Russians are helping them get to the border as part of a scheme, as I say, in order to try and play geopolitical games, according to the government in Finland. Now, it is important to note this is not just happening in Finland, it's also happening in neighbouring Norway. The government there has suggested it too may be about to close its border with Russia because of a big spike in people arriving at its border claiming asylum. And this is not necessarily a new problem in Europe. We have seen this type of action before when immigrants were travelling through Belarus in order to try and gain entry to Poland, again a European Union country. And for people caught in the crosshairs of this, they are quite often desperate people trying to gain asylum or migration rights to the European Union, but they find themselves really caught up in a game of geopolitical chess between the EU and Russia. So moving forward as we go into the winter, we know conditions there are very, very tough for people trying to cross illegally. But what we are hearing is that governments across Europe are going to treat this problem very, very seriously. And if it comes to it, close the borders with Russia completely. Trent Murray for DD India, Berlin.
And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Pedro Sanchez was re-elected by a majority of legislators to form a new government on Thursday. It comes despite divisions in the country over his decision to grant Catalan separatists amnesty in exchange for their crucial support in a vote of confidence. Argentina is gearing up for presidential elections. The country's finance minister and presidential candidate Sergio Massa ended his election campaign at a public high school in Buenos Aires. Argentina, facing its worst economic crisis in decades, will vote on Sunday. Thousands of students skipped school across Australia on Friday to demand climate action and halt investment in coal and gas projects. Thousands of children marched in the streets of Sydney, Melbourne and other cities. And music industry's top Latin music artists arrived for the Latin Grammy Awards in Spain's Sevilla on Thursday. For the first time, the event has not been held in the United States. Latin artists Maluma Bizarrap and Pablo Alborán dazzled the red carpet of the Seville event. The Latin Grammy Awards are handed out annually by the Latin Recording Academy. So that's it in this edition of DD India Global. We apologize for not being able to connect to our colleague in London, Julia Chapman. Nonetheless, do join us for another edition of the show at 7:30 p.m. IST. That one is live from Washington. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back here as news unfolds. I am Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.